3 weeks after a wedding that shocked an entire community, a young groom was found dead, and the bride, his 70-year-old wife, stood accused of his murder. But was this an act of cold-blooded revenge, or the unraveling of a carefully orchestrated deception that went too far? This story is not just about marriage, betrayal, or even murder, it's about power, greed, and the thin line between trust and manipulation. When love is weaponized, and when desperation meets deceit, the results can be both shocking and irreversible. Tonight, we journey through the unsettling events of a marriage that lasted only 21 days but ended in blood and tragedy. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the most chilling, dramatic, and thought-provoking true crime stories. And if you enjoy long-form storytelling, grab a drink, settle in, because this case will keep you hooked until the very end. 70-year-old Eleanor Price had lived most of her life in the quiet town of Millwood, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the local bakery doubled as a gossip hub, and where time seemed to move at a slower, more predictable pace. Eleanor had been a widow for nearly a decade, and although she carried herself with dignity, loneliness was etched into the lines of her face. Her late husband, Thomas, had been her companion for over 40 years. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was steady, filled with simple rituals like Sunday church, tending to their rose garden, and evenings spent on the porch sipping tea. When Thomas passed away, Eleanor threw herself into maintaining those routines, clinging to them like life rafts in an ocean of emptiness. She filled her days with gardening, church activities, and volunteering at the community center, but the nights were long, and the silence in her house pressed against her like an invisible weight. Eleanor wasn't looking for love. Not at 70. Not after losing the man she'd built her life with. But life has a cruel way of surprising people. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when she first met Anthony Brooks. He was standing in line at Millwood Grocer's, carrying nothing but a carton of eggs and a pack of chewing gum. Eleanor had dropped her purse, and the contents spilled across the floor: lipstick, tissues, coupons, and a small photograph of her and Thomas on their wedding day. Anthony crouched down immediately, gathering her things with an easy smile. "You've got a beautiful smile," he said softly as he handed back the photograph. "You must have been stunning on that day." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. Compliments were rare at her age, especially from someone like him. He couldn't have been more than 32, tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features softened by a boyish charm. His eyes were a piercing shade of hazel, and when he looked at her, it was as though he saw past the gray hair and wrinkles. From that moment, their paths seemed to cross constantly. At the bakery, at the church social, even during her morning walks. Anthony claimed he had moved to Millwood to start a new business, something about real estate investments and opening up opportunities in the sleepy town. The locals were skeptical, whispering that a man his age surely had bigger ambitions than Millwood could offer. But Anthony had a way of disarming suspicion. He was always polite, always helpful, always ready with a laugh or a story. Eleanor, against her better judgment, found herself drawn in. She enjoyed their conversations. He asked about her favorite books, her garden, her childhood memories. He seemed genuinely interested in her life, something few people had been in years. The loneliness she carried like a heavy cloak began to lift. By spring, Anthony was stopping by her house to help with small tasks, fixing a leaky faucet, replacing light bulbs, mowing the lawn. He insisted he didn't want payment, and when Eleanor protested, he smiled and said, "Your company is payment enough." The whispers in town grew louder. At the beauty salon, Eleanor overheard women murmuring. "Why is he spending so much time with her? He's too young. There's no way this is real. Mark my words, he's after her money." But Eleanor ignored them. She told herself that people were envious, that they didn't understand the companionship she had found. For the first time in years, she felt noticed, cared for, alive. Anthony began to charm not just Eleanor but those around her. At church, he sang hymns with enthusiasm. At potlucks, he helped carry dishes and poured drinks for the elderly. The pastor described him as a blessing to our community. Slowly, the judgmental whispers quieted, replaced by cautious acceptance. After all, who were they to question love, however unconventional it looked? And then came the moment no one saw coming. Anthony proposed. It was a mild summer evening. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across Eleanor's porch. They had just finished dinner, roast chicken with mashed potatoes, Eleanor's specialty. As she carried the plates inside, Anthony stopped her, took her hand, and dropped to one knee. "Eleanor," he said, his voice steady but filled with an intensity that made her heart race, "I know our love is unexpected. I know people may not understand. But I don't care about any of that. I care about you. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you're never lonely again. Will you marry me?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't imagined herself as a bride again. She hadn't even dared to dream of it. And here was this young, vibrant man asking for her hand. Against every whisper, every doubt, every warning from the quiet voice in her head, she said yes. The wedding was small, intimate, almost secretive. Just a handful of church friends, neighbors, and Anthony's business associates, who were strangers to everyone else. Eleanor wore a pale blue dress instead of white, her silver hair pinned neatly with a pearl comb. Anthony wore a dark suit and a smile that lit up the room. When they exchanged vows, some in the pews whispered prayers for her happiness, while others muttered suspicions under their breath. But Eleanor, standing there with Anthony's warm hand wrapped around hers, chose not to hear them. In her heart, she believed she had been given a second chance at love. For 3 weeks, the town watched them closely. Some claimed Eleanor glowed with joy, that Anthony treated her with tenderness and devotion. Others swore they saw cracks, that Anthony's smile never reached his eyes, that he often looked at her not with love, but with calculation. Whatever the truth, it wouldn't remain hidden for long. 3 weeks later, Anthony Brooks would be dead, and Eleanor Price would stand accused of killing the man who promised to take away her loneliness. The first week of marriage passed like a performance. Eleanor, still glowing in the aftershock of being chosen, of finally being seen, wore her new role as Anthony's wife like an elegant costume. She would rise early, set the table with care, polish the silverware that had belonged to her late husband, and prepare tea in the chipped porcelain teapot that once served her parents. Anthony would smile at her efforts, but his smiles were rehearsed, like an actor hitting his marks. His charm hadn't vanished, it had merely shifted. It was softer, subtler, but with an undercurrent of distance. He kissed her forehead instead of her lips. He complimented her dress but never her spirit. Eleanor told herself this was normal. Men settled after marriage. The passion faded into routine. She believed it because she needed to. But there were moments, little, almost invisible moments, when Eleanor felt a chill crawl up her spine. One evening, as she poured him a glass of brandy, she noticed the way his eyes lingered not on her face but on the ornate cabinet in the corner. Inside it sat the neatly bound folders of property deeds, bank statements, and inheritance records from her late husband. She had once told Anthony in confidence that she kept everything organized there, afraid of misplacing important papers. At the time, he had squeezed her hand and told her she was wise. Now, she noticed how his gaze kept drifting toward that cabinet like a predator watching the slowest animal in the herd. "Anthony?" she asked softly, trying to pull him back. He blinked as though caught in a daze, then smiled that polished smile. "You look lovely tonight, Eleanor. That color suits you." Her heart fluttered, foolishly reassured, yet something remained unsettled deep inside her chest. The neighbors had their own whispers. 2 women, Mrs. Holloway and Mrs. Grant, passed Eleanor in the market one Thursday morning. Their voices dropped low, but not low enough. "A 70-year-old bride and a man young enough to be her son," Mrs. Holloway murmured. "It isn't natural," Mrs. Grant replied. "Mark my words, he's after something." Eleanor felt the words slice into her back, but she forced her chin higher. She bought her bread and tea without a tremor in her voice. At home, though, she sat at the kitchen table staring at her hands. They were wrinkled, lined by time, spotted by age. Hands that told the truth she tried to bury. Was Anthony after her? Or was he truly after something? One night, about 10 days into the marriage, Eleanor woke to find Anthony missing from their bed. Panic clawed at her chest. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and crept downstairs, her slippers brushing the old wooden steps. There, in the glow of a single candle, she saw him. Anthony was seated at her late husband's desk, the drawers pulled open, papers spread before him. Her voice broke the silence. "Anthony, what are you doing?" His head jerked up. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. She saw something raw in his eyes, greed, desperation, calculation. But in an instant, he covered it with a charming laugh. "Darling, you startled me. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd review some of the documents you always worry about. You work too hard keeping them in order." I wanted to help. Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to the idea of a man who loved her enough to lose sleep over her burdens. But something in the way his fingers clutched the papers, too tight, too eager, gnawed at her trust. She nodded slowly. You should have asked me first." "Of course, Eleanor," he said smoothly, rising to kiss her temple. "It won't happen again." But she knew it would. Over the following days, Anthony grew bolder. He suggested she sign small slips of paper, just routine things, he called them. Delivery confirmations, bank forms, innocuous letters. Eleanor, swept by love and trust, signed without reading too closely. Each signature felt like a token of devotion, proof that she believed in him. Still, her nights grew restless. In her dreams, she saw Anthony's eyes glowing in the dark, his smile widening like a blade. One stormy evening, she stood at the window watching rain lash against the glass. Anthony came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. His lips brushed her ear as he whispered, "You've made me the happiest man alive, Eleanor. You'll never regret choosing me." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they filled her with dread. Because for the first time since meeting him, she realized, she didn't fully know who Anthony was. The third week of marriage began like a slow-moving storm. At first, the air was heavy but quiet. Eleanor could almost convince herself that the unease pressing against her chest was just age, nerves, or loneliness playing tricks on her. But as the days stretched, the silence in the house became sharp, every sound echoing with a strange weight. Anthony had grown affectionate in a way that felt different, not softer, not warmer, but almost rehearsed. His compliments were too perfectly timed. His laughter rang hollow. Even the way he reached for her hand felt like an act, his grip lingering just long enough to make her forget her doubts before he let go too quickly. Eleanor began noticing the small shifts that didn't add up. One morning, she came down to the kitchen to find Anthony sitting at the table with a letter already opened in front of him. It bore the crest of her late husband's solicitor. Her heart jumped. "Anthony, why are you opening my letters?" He looked up calmly, as if the question didn't faze him. "Eleanor, darling, we're married now. Your business is my business. I was just making sure there wasn't anything urgent you'd missed." She pressed her lips together, torn between pride and fear. A part of her wanted to scold him, to demand her privacy back. But another part whispered that maybe this was what marriage was supposed to look like, shared responsibilities, shared lives. And so she said nothing. She just folded the letter and tucked it into her robe, her fingers trembling against the thin paper. But the documents weren't the only things he sought. At dinner, Anthony began asking about her health, about the long-term medications she kept neatly lined on the bathroom shelf, about the little aches she sometimes mentioned when climbing stairs. His questions seemed kind at first, but soon they turned pointed. "You take those heart tablets every night, don't you?" he asked once, his fork paused midair. "Yes," she said, startled. "Why?" He smiled thinly. "Just making sure you're taking care of yourself. I couldn't bear to lose you." The words might have sounded loving, but in his tone, there was something else, something Eleanor couldn't name, yet it chilled her to the bone. By the 12th day of marriage, Anthony made his boldest request yet. They sat together in the parlor, the firelight flickering across the walls. Eleanor was knitting, her needles clicking softly, when Anthony set down a folder on the coffee table. "Eleanor," he said smoothly, "I've been thinking. You've carried the weight of this house, your inheritance, and all these responsibilities for far too long. I'd like to help. To take some of the burden off your shoulders." Her knitting slowed. Help, how? He slid the folder closer. I spoke to the solicitor last week. There's a simple document we can sign, just a matter of consolidating your assets under both our names. It's a formality, really. Husbands and wives often do it. It'll make everything easier to manage. Her throat tightened. She remembered the whispers in the market, the way the neighbors had warned he was after something. She remembered the night she'd caught him rifling through her husband's desk. Her hands trembled around the yarn. Anthony. I don't know. These are big decisions. His smile faltered for the first time. For a second, his mask cracked. Then he leaned forward, his voice silk but sharp at the edges. Eleanor, don't you trust me? The question was a trap. If she said no, she risked angering him, tearing open the fragile fabric of their marriage. If she said yes, she'd be handing him the very thing she feared he wanted. She forced a weak smile. Of course I trust you. I'd like to take some time to think about it. Anthony leaned back, the firelight dancing in his eyes. He said nothing more, but the silence between them grew thick and dangerous. That night, Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time since Anthony had walked into her life, she admitted a thought she had buried deep down. What if I made a mistake? The question haunted her long after Anthony's steady breathing filled the room beside her. The tension between Eleanor and Anthony reached its breaking point on the 17th day of their marriage. Anthony pressed harder about the documents. He staged it casually, coffee on the table, pen in his hand, papers neatly arranged. He told Eleanor it was just about making life easier and protecting their future. She hesitated, but under his sharp gaze, her defenses weakened. The man she had trusted, the husband she thought cared for her, was no longer asking, he was demanding. With trembling hands, Eleanor signed. Anthony's smile was cold, victorious. He kissed her cheek, called her darling, and tucked the papers away like a prize. That was the moment Eleanor realized, she had handed her life over. Hours later, the truth came crashing down. Eleanor discovered that Anthony had already transferred money, already spoken to the solicitor about her house, already moved as if she were gone. The argument erupted in the kitchen. Eleanor's voice shook with fury. You tricked me. You used me. Anthony leaned against the counter, smirking. You gave it all willingly. What did you think? That I married you for love? The words cut deeper than any blade. Something inside Eleanor broke. In a blur of rage, she reached for the heavy iron candlestick on the counter. Anthony tried to stop her with a laugh, but the laugh was his last. The blow struck. He crumpled. Silence filled the house. Eleanor stood frozen, staring at the lifeless body of her husband. Shock, grief, and terror flooded her all at once. She hadn't planned this, not the way the prosecution would later claim. But once the deed was done, there was no undoing it. When neighbors heard shouting, when they called the police, Eleanor didn't run. She sat at the kitchen table, hands stained, waiting. By midnight, she was in custody. The woman who had signed her life away just hours before was now signing a confession of sorts, though she insisted it was self-defense. The courthouse was packed. Everyone wanted to see the 70-year-old widow who had killed her 32-year-old husband after only 3 weeks of marriage. Eleanor Price sat quietly at the defense table, frail yet composed. Across from her, the prosecution painted a very different picture, not a victim, but a woman who carefully plotted revenge. The evidence was laid bare. The signed documents, transferring control of her assets to Anthony. The bank records, showing Anthony had already begun moving her funds. The candle holder, still carrying his blood. And her own words, shouted loud enough for neighbors to hear, "You stole from me." The prosecution argued it was clear, Eleanor knew what she was doing when she struck him. Her defense team told another story. They showed Eleanor as a lonely widow deceived by a man nearly 40 years younger. They described Anthony as a con artist who manipulated her trust, cornered her with paperwork, and mocked her betrayal. They argued she snapped in the heat of the moment, that this was not murder, but desperation, a woman pushed beyond her limit. Witnesses testified. Neighbors recalled the shouting that night. A handwriting expert confirmed Eleanor signed the documents willingly, though likely without understanding. A medical examiner confirmed Anthony died instantly from the blow. When Eleanor herself took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. She spoke softly. "I loved him. Or at least I thought I did. I trusted him, and he destroyed me. I didn't plan to kill Anthony. I just wanted him to stop laughing at me." The jury deliberated for hours. When they returned, the verdict was clear: guilty of second-degree murder. Not premeditation. Not cold blood. But murder all the same. The judge's voice echoed as he delivered the sentence: 25 years in prison. At her age, it was as good as a life sentence. Eleanor bowed her head. She did not cry. When the sentence was handed down, Millwood divided into two camps. Some saw Eleanor as a murderer who let anger turn her into something monstrous. They argued that no betrayal, no matter how deep, excused taking a life. But others whispered that Anthony got what he deserved. They called him a predator, a man who preyed on loneliness and trust, who would have ruined Eleanor completely if she hadn't stopped him. Behind bars, Eleanor aged quickly. 25 years at her age was more than a punishment, it was the end of her freedom, the end of everything she had built. She spent her days quietly, never contesting her conviction, never speaking Anthony's name again. Anthony, in death, became infamous. His charm and his schemes unraveled as more people came forward: women he had deceived, men he had conned, promises he had broken. Eleanor wasn't his first victim, but she was the only one who fought back in the most final way. The marriage lasted 3 weeks. The fallout lasted a lifetime. This case wasn't just about an older woman and a younger man. It was about trust, power, and desperation colliding. Eleanor wanted love, companionship, and safety in her final years. Anthony wanted wealth, control, and a quick escape. Their union was doomed from the start, not by age, but by motives. And when lies were exposed, tragedy was inevitable. What do you think? Was Eleanor a victim who snapped under unbearable pressure, or was she fully responsible for her choices that night? Could she have walked away, or was this ending bound to happen once she signed those papers? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story gripped you, make sure to like this video, share it with others who enjoy deep dive storytelling, and subscribe for more cases just like this one. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story where love, betrayal, and crime intertwine. Until next time, stay safe, stay alert, and remember, sometimes the people we trust most hold the sharpest knives.